Coming up on The World Today. India's COVID-19 cases surged by 200,000 today, raising the country's tally to 18 million. The EU legal case against AstraZeneca begins in Brussels court. Plus, 3 killed in a suicide attack outside the Somali capital, Mogadishu. Welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. All eyes are still on India, where coronavirus cases have been hitting record numbers. Today, they surged past 200,000. The second wave of infections has seen at least 300,000 people test positive each day for the past 1 week, overwhelming healthcare facilities and crematoriums.
A lineup of ambulances carrying patients who may never make it into the hospital are common sights in India's capital, New Delhi. Even though the hospitals are full and the healthcare system overwhelmed, they've had nowhere else to go but here for oxygen and for care. One resident says the situation is horrific and everyone is so afraid loved ones they are seeing today may only have hours left to live. The last 24 hours brought 360,960 cases for the world's largest single-day total, taking the country's tally to nearly 18 million. It was also the deadliest day so far, with 3,293 fatalities, carrying the death toll to 201,187. From December to early March, India's single-day new COVID-19 cases remained at a relatively low level, even below 10,000. However, with the increase of large-scale gatherings such as religious activities and political elections, people relaxed their vigilance. The daily cases began to rise in late March and repeatedly set new all-time highs in April. The international community has been rallying to help. Today, Singapore sent 2 plane loads of oxygen cylinders. Video from Singapore's Defense Ministry shows oxygen tanks being loaded and sent to the country on C-130 planes. A total of 256 refillable cylinders were sent by the Air Force. Oxygen has been in high demand since the surge in cases. Long queues outside a New Delhi factory have been common, with people desperate to refill oxygen cylinders. Chinese factories are busy producing medical equipment to support India. UL, one of the largest concentrator producers in the world, is busy fulfilling orders from India. The factory has one of the longest production lines for oxygen concentrator in the world, extending 500 meters. It can produce 100,000 concentrators a month. Meanwhile, Russian pharmaceutical company Pharmasynthesis says it is waiting for the decision by the Russian government that would allow it to ship up to 1 million packs of antiviral drugs to India by May end to help fight a surge in COVID-19 cases there. So far, the UK has sent ventilators and concentrators, and the US says it will be sending materials for vaccines. The EU also says it would be looking to send aid to India.
Well, just an update there from India. As we hear, 45 journalists have died from the coronavirus in just 2 weeks. WhatsApp groups in the country have been filled with constant messages of condolences, with prayer emojis, and messages of thanks for helping others get beds, medicines, and oxygen. Crematoriums are also running out of space, with some operating non-stop. People are even forced to build makeshift funeral pyres in parks and other empty spaces. Here's a global update.
Global Update begins in Tunisia, where intensive care wards are being filled by a new surge in COVID-19 cases that has outstripped a vaccination campaign limited by short supplies. Last week, one of the government's scientific advisors warned the health system was on the brink of collapse, with between 90 to 110 new patients in need of hospitalization each day. Tunisia has only about 500 intensive care beds. French President Emmanuel Macron is expected to deliver an update on Friday on how the COVID-19 restrictions will progressively be relaxed in the country. A bill on a transitional regime that will detail reopening measures will be presented to Parliament. France's main COVID-19 indicators all showed some signs of improvement on Tuesday, with the 7-day move-in of daily new infections falling to 27,856, standing below the 28,000 level for the first time in more than a month. The total number of COVID-19 cases in the United States has topped 32.17 million. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention unveiled guidelines for fully vaccinated Americans on Tuesday, including activities they can safely resume without wearing masks. Fully vaccinated people can participate in outdoor activities and recreation without a face covering, according to the CDC. Finally, the Cambodian capital is preparing for a one-week extension of its current lockdown aimed at curbing coronavirus infections. Under the new lockdown rules, starting from midnight on Thursday, the government will ease travel for some residents in safe yellow zones, while bans on the sale of alcohol and curfews remain in place. Residents who remain in red and orange zones are still banned from leaving their homes, except for medical reasons.
In another development, China says it would be a political farce with a preset outcome aimed at smearing and suppressing China if the United States submits its so-called recommendations to the World Health Organization, pushing back on a hypothesis that the COVID-19 could have spread via frozen food products and asking for a review of medical records of laboratory staff. It is reported that the United States is developing recommendations to the WHO to push back against China's hypothesis that the virus could be transmitted through frozen food press for the release of more data and early evidence for the virus, as well as a review of medical records of staff at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Zhao Lijian, says the U.S. should know that the joint WHO-China study on COVID-19 origin tracing reached a definite conclusion that introduction of the virus through cold chain food products is considered a pathway, a possible one at that, and the introduction through a laboratory incident was considered to be extremely unlikely. Let's talk to the VOA's senior diplomatic correspondent, Cindy Sain. She joins us now from Washington. Cindy, great to see you as always. I want to begin with India and what the American government is doing to help the country with its surging coronavirus cases. We have heard the U.S. is sending materials for vaccines. What's the update?
Well, that's right. And there was a growing outcry that the U.S. had been slow to respond, as you showed these shocking images coming out of India with this staggering death toll. So President Joe Biden said he had a long talk with Indian Prime Minister Modi and basically said he was prepared to do what Modi was asking for. And that includes a whole range of measures, including sending antiviral drugs, including sending actual parts for the machines in India which produce the vaccine. And President Biden said, we would like to send doses of the actual vaccine. He said the problem is that we need to get more vaccines approved here domestically. And he mentioned Novavax specifically. And when he is sure that the U.S. population has enough that he could start sharing vaccines, the U.S. could start sharing vaccines on a large scale with other countries. And this is becoming an issue which is more and more in the forefront. There was a meeting of the World Trade Organization on Friday, and several countries are calling for these intellectual property protections to be waived so that to pave the way for wider access to the COVID-19 vaccine for more countries. And human rights advocates are saying, look, this is a human rights issue. People are dying. We need to act quickly. And the U.S., and not just the U.S., but other Western countries who have developed the vaccine need to waive these usually sort of thorny property rights and allow more access so that countries can make the vaccine on their own and not be dependent on any other countries.
Indeed. And I'm just wondering whether the U.S. really is worried about the rising cases in India. As you were talking, we're rolling videos side by side, people begging hospital staff for oxygen or beds. And, you heard the story about 45 journalists already dead in 2 weeks. People just lining up to receive oxygen at the hospitals. Oxygens that are seriously running out. So how concerned really is the U.S. government about this? Because some other countries have imposed restrictions on flights from India, not just because of the number of cases, but also because of the strain of coronavirus coming out of India.
Well, that's correct. And I spoke with some travel industry experts who said they were a bit perplexed that the U.S. Does not have a travel ban on India. The U.S. has travel bans on the UK and Ireland and Brazil, South Africa, a number of other countries, but no travel ban on India. Although the U.S. State Department does advise Americans not to travel to India. It's a level 4, do not travel, mainly because of the coronavirus. But there is no travel ban at this time, and I think it just increases calls for the urgency for the U.S., which itself, as we all remember, got off to a very rough start, leading the world still in coronavirus deaths, where things have stabilized for the moment with a good vaccine rollout under the Biden administration, so that the U.S. Needs to start looking outward and sharing and helping.
Yeah, and interesting that this is happening now because just yesterday, the CDC announced guidelines for fully vaccinated Americans. Talk to us about that, Cindy, and, what that could mean with, as you say, no restrictions on flights coming from India. Does this mean a loosening of COVID-19 restrictions in the U.S.?
Right. Well, as your reporter said, it seems to be sort of a gradual, not too drastic easing of restrictions, that Americans don't need to wear their masks outdoors unless they're in crowded venues or crowded areas. And I think sort of common sense, some people had been doing this. If you're going on a solitary walk outdoors, no need really to wear the mask, but very much still wearing the mask indoors anytime you go out in public. And I think as in other places, a lot of Americans are very tired of the restrictions, but seeing these images from India and other countries reminds us all that we're all still in this together.
Yeah, so no loosening of restrictions there, no freedom yet. Cindy, thanks again. And do stay safe.
My pleasure.
Of course. Meanwhile, the European Commission has made good its intentions to sue AstraZeneca over COVID-19 vaccine deliveries. Today, its lawsuit against the drug company began at a Brussels court. The case is the latest twist in an often bad-humored EU dispute with the Anglo-Swedish drug maker, and at times with Britain. The bloc accuses the company of failure to respect its contract. With the pandemic still raging across the continent, the AstraZeneca vaccine was seen as a central part of Europe's immunization campaign and a way to send coronavirus jabs to poorer countries because of its easier storage requirements. But cuts and delays in AstraZeneca deliveries have weighed on the choppy inoculation campaign in the EU, which trails behind Britain, the United States, or Israel on vaccination. A lawyer for the EU Executive Commission told the Brussels court hearing that the bloc was seeking immediate deliveries from all factories listed in its contract, including those in Britain, which is no longer a member of the European Union. Still ahead on the program. Egyptologists uncover what they believe to be rare tombs from before the pharaohs. Join us again. Welcome back to The World Today. 3 civilians have been killed, 7 others injured. One of them is a baby after a car bomb exploded outside a prison on the outskirts of the Somalian capital, Mogadishu. The explosion happened near the entrance of the compound and damaged some complexes and destroyed vehicles around the area. It comes as President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed says he would drop an attempt to extend his terms by 2 years, bowing to domestic and international pressure after clashes in the capital Mogadishu split security forces along clan lines. The president's term expired in February, but the country failed to hold elections as planned. Earlier this month, the lower house of parliament voted to extend Mohamed's 4-year term for another 2 years. The Senate rejected the move, provoking a political crisis. Back in the U.S., reports say 6 people were arrested Tuesday night after dozens of demonstrators defied the 8 p.m. curfew in Elizabeth City in North Carolina to protest the shooting by a sheriff of a black man last week. According to the Charlotte Observer, at about 10 p.m., riot police moved slowly towards peaceful protesters who refused to comply with multiple unlawful assembly warnings before arresting 4 people, including the former leader of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Reverend Curtis Gatewood, who lay in the street waiting for arrest, along with 2 others. Pasquotank County Sheriff Tommy Wooten said in a videotaped statement last week that his deputies were trying to serve Brown with search and arrest warrants stemming from a felony drug charge, and the incident was over in fewer than 30 seconds. Now, in the same video, Chief Deputy Daniel Falk described Brown as a convicted felon whose history of resisting arrest posed what he called a high risk of danger to deputies confronting him.
If you refuse to leave the area, you will be arrested. Carolina General Statute. Move back!
Earlier that Tuesday, lawyers for the Brown family said that an independent autopsy showed that he died from a kill shot to his head as he tried to drive away. A 42-year-old Andrew Brown Jr. was struck with multiple bullets in the arm before the fatal shot to his head. Lawyers for the family have asked the police to release the findings of an independent autopsy.
That was the manner of death by gunshot.
Now, you all know from the death certificate that it was a penetrating gunshot wound to the head. But Attorney Sellers, what they did not know was that it was a kill shot to the back of the head.
He was able to back up, turn the vehicle around, spin off across a vacant lot, and at that time, he was hit in the back of the head here, and that is the fatal bullet wound that was described in the death certificate as a penetrating bullet wound to the skull. And that was the cause of death, that was the manner of death by gunshot.
So the lawyers did release the findings of an independent autopsy showing a killer shot did take Andrew Brown Jr. Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird joins us now. Maria, I know this isn't really like, George Floyd. I mean, the circumstances are different, but it does remind us again about George Floyd and, the way the police attempts, to make arrests, the use of force. Do you think they really intended to kill him?
The excessive use of force issue is whether or not it's a knee to a neck, it's a bullet shot wound to the head, which is what we see here. And so the question that I think the lawyers have clearly been able to articulate is, how can you say there was no intent to kill when there was a bullet wound to the back of the head? That is considered a kill shot. And so when you see that type of evidence and you're talking about 5 shots to a man, how are you just trying to stop him? How are you just trying to defend yourself when you've taken that type of very aggressive and intense action? And so it's going to be very hard for the state to come up with information that will lend to the police officer's defense, because the police officer, having had that last shot, I think that has become such a part of the news and obviously a part of what the lawyers are now stating, is clearly stating that there could have been and there's a strong likelihood and intent to kill.
Yeah, and as I'm reading, what the Chief Deputy Daniel Fogg described as Brown had a history of resisting arrest. He posed high risk of danger. I'm reminded of the Derek Chauvin trial again of George Floyd, in which they tried to paint George Floyd as a drug addict, as someone who was probably high on some sort of drug, and that probably led to his death. And here again, they're trying to paint Andrew Brown again as a dangerous person, and it just gives us flashbacks and so on. But you think the police is pushing back, because even after Derek Chauvin was found guilty of the murder of George Floyd, the DOJ launched a probe into the Minneapolis Police Department, and there have been also investigations into the Louisville Police Department as well. Since then, there have been at least 6 police shootings in the United States.
Yes, this is going to be, and there's another probe into this. The Civil Rights Division is looking into the Anthony Brown case as well. And so I think that it's going to be incumbent upon the federal government to make a clear sign that they will investigate, and they're going to have to call for reform in policing. I'm not sure if you all have heard Bakari Seller, one of the lawyers for Brown, has stated it's no more of just protesting. There is a need to dismantle and to completely reform policing in the United States, because clearly police officers are following what they're perceiving to be the guidelines, which unfortunately are resulting in the death of many Black men. I mean, if you even look at the stereotypes that have been developed, and not to mirror George Floyd and Anthony Brown, but you look at the imagery of a Black man, large physique. I mean, these are all of the issues that we've seen consistently, as you said, over the last few weeks. But obviously, this is an occurrence that has been happening for many years in the United States. And so it's really a call now to action. There was a call to action to allow the body cam footage to be released, but there's going to be another call to action, which is going to be to see some real reform, not just addressing policing and how they act on the street, but actually the rules and laws and the training of police officers. And so this is going to require legislation. This is going to require coming in from the DOJ, federal government, putting certain statutes in place that states will have to follow.
Maria, thanks again. I couldn't have said it any more clearer. Thank you for joining us on The World Today, and do stay safe.
Thank you for having me.
And as we end, the Egyptian archaeologists working on the Nile Delta have uncovered dozens of rare pre-dynastic tombs dating to the period before Egypt's pharaonic kingdoms first emerged more than 5,000 years ago. They also found tombs nearby from the later Hyksos period. That's from 1650 to 1500 BC, when Western Asian migrants took over the country, putting an end to Egypt's Middle Kingdom. Egyptologists say the findings in the Dakalia province north of Cairo could shed light on 2 important transitional periods in ancient Egypt. The tombs include 68 from the Buto period that began around 3300 BC, and 5 from Nakada third period, which was just before the emergence of Egypt's first dynasty around 3100 BC. According to the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, they also include 37 tombs from the time of the Hyksos, who first began migrating across the Sinai into Egypt around 1800 BC. A lot of history there. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Rubani.